All right, here we go. Hello, my name is Reese Bugadrov, pronouns he, him, and this is the presentation for topic assignment 1. So, in this presentation, we'll be covering depictions of work in media, my personal experiences of alienation at the workplace, and what my future career looks like, and what the internet says that it is, essentially. So the examples I chose for depictions of work in media are Jane the Virgin, Criminal Minds, and a song by Britney Spears titled Work Bitch. Jane the Virgin is an amazing telenovela that first aired in 2014 and ran until 2019 on the CW. The main character is a young woman who lives in a Spanish family, an immigrant Spanish family. I believe they're living in Miami. Um, and the main character is a writer, and the entire show is somewhere between her virginity, her career, and her love life. And because it's a telenovela, there are many, many details that I'm missing. Um, and in Criminal Minds is a true crime show that focuses particularly on the FBI's behavioral science unit, I believe it's called. Um, I don't remember the name of the guy who invented it, but he's the basis of a lot of their cases. And a lot of their cases are based on actual cases that have happened in America or Canada, I think. There's some of them up there, which makes for a really interesting show. Do recommend. And if you don't know who Britney Spears is, that's concerning. Um, she is a very young pop star way back in, like, I don't know, the early 2000s, 90s, I think. Um, but her song Work Bitch came out in 2013, and it was part of her, I don't know, kind of comeback, I guess. But that's not really important to the context of work. So in Jane the Virgin, work is usually represented by the main character. Um, she is working as a waitress at a hotel for the majority of the show. She has aspirations to be a writer. Um, so a lot of the plot does center around her work and her workplace. Um, so work is often represented as something she has to do in order to earn money, in order to live, and also further her career, preferably as a writer. Um, and it's seen as a necessity. Um, and of course, it is also the center of quite a bit of drama in the show. This is where she meets, the love of her life and such, who happens to be the owner of the hotel, who happens to also technically be married, but he's not, and it's just a telenovela. As always, it's a mess. Um, and to her, waitressing at this hotel means being around her friends. She has very good friends around her there. And it seems to mean not just making money, but also being with her friends and being able to express the part of her that really just wants to help people, um, and just make everyone else happy, which of course is later a plot point. um, from the work experience versus the character versus the audience sees it more as a plot point and a set piece, um, rather than what it means to the character, because it is so integral to the show. Like, this is just, she goes to work, and then there's always a plot point that happens that stops her from working in some way. Um, and of course, real life isn't always that dramatic, but it is a telenovela. So I hope I answered all those questions. Um, as to Criminal Minds, um, so a lot of true crime shows, I would say this is common to a lot of true crime shows like CSI Las Vegas and CSI Miami and Criminal Minds have a lot of this in common, where the entire show is centered around work. And work is seen as the culmination of, like, their entire lives. Like, they live to work, they don't really have social lives. And if they do, it's often pushed aside. Work means more to them than almost anything else. And that there's always like a dramatic plot point where that the work ends up being above family, children, and spouse. So that's really interesting, especially since in most shows it's a very male dominated workplace as well. Um, and this is an extremely intellectual workplace, um, where seeing them in their cubicles or doing any paperwork is pretty rare. Though, if you happen to speak to anyone who is actually in these fields, paperwork is about 90% of their work, and field work, which is the entire show, um, is actually more rare. So kind of, true crime shows do have a way of picking all the quote unquote exciting bits of what work in um, criminology is. So that's definitely interesting. Um, Criminal Minds, I find, is one of the exceptions where, though there is a majority of men, there is 4 women that work as part of the main cast. And I think that's pretty significant for a true crime show. I remember that CSI Las Vegas had only one character for a long time, and I don't think that changed very much um, over the years. Um, and work is experienced by the characters in Criminal Minds as, again, the culmination of everything. Like, that they live to work. And to the audience, the work is what's interesting. The work is part of the plot. The work is um, what follows the storyline. What drives the plot is the work. It is like the main part of it. It is the concept of the show. I hope that answered all the questions. And then we have Work Bitch by Britney Spears. So, if you don't know, the lyrics to Work Bitch are very much the kind of Protestant work ethic that class talked about now and then, where, the bootstraps must be pulled up. where if you just work hard enough, you can have this fancy life. So, um, main parts of the lyrics and what really comes to my mind is like, do you want a Bugatti? Do you want a Maserati? Then you better work, bitch. So she's listing off all these really nice cars, right? And like she literally says, do you want to live fancy? Do you want to live in a big mansion? Do you want to party in France? Well, then you better work, bitch. Um, and so um, it's this, again, this whole narrative that if you just work hard enough, you can have this crazy, glamorous life. Um, and work in this song, the actual work, is not really represented. Neither is it really in the music video. It's just Britney in various outfits being very hot and various dances and other dancers around her. Um, so while work isn't being truly represented, it is being talked about as a means to an end. So when work is experienced, it is more like a chore. It's something you have to do in order to get something you want. And Britney Spears is not exactly the right voice to promote this kind of narrative. She is not. Her life, though I won't say it hasn't come with its costs and trauma, it's not exactly something that you would call where she worked really, really hard and got where she is now. Um, it's more like the common stories and narratives of a child star, and how it's mostly their parents that really control everything. Um, so her fame and maybe the kind of luxuries that she's talking about in this song, first of all, she may not necessarily have all of these luxuries herself, and she did not, quote, work for them, as this song might imply. Um, as for the audience taking this in, I'm sure that they find it a little hypocritical as well. But to guilty pleasures like me, I just find it really catchy. Um, and I'll say it motivates me, but not because of the narrative, but because of the tune. Um, so all of these together, so Jane the Virgin, Criminal Minds, Work Bitch, they're all very, very different. So where we're talking about work being represented authentically, then it's certainly very interesting that in our media, we're either promoting a narrative without actually attaching the kind of work it involves and what it takes to get to a place of, quote, luxury or a place of happiness, as often work seems to be tied into your life and your happiness and what it means to maybe put work above a lot of other important things like family. So I would say that out of all of these three examples, Jane the Virgin is probably the most positive because it shows a struggle that a lot of people go through. I think it's also um, representative of what a lot of more creative folk go through. Um, I was a writer for a long time. I did a lot of freelancing. So I really connected with her struggle to make a living and be creative and work for somebody that maybe you didn't like very much and still have another job on top of it all. So I definitely understood that. And that is besides all of the love life drama and nonsense that happens in that show for sure. Um, and where Criminal Minds seems to be kind of a middle ground, where on one hand they do represent work authentically, but it's not as authentic as it could be. But it's also a TV show and it needs drama. So it makes it difficult to try and drive a plot when most of this particular field is often paperwork and just talking to people. And usually it's not all that exciting. um, in fact, I believe the Bureau of Behavioral um, Science section, I forget what they're called, I'm sorry. Um, they usually just do a kind of third party profile for, and they're often not called in to specific cases. That doesn't actually happen that often. So a lot of this actually going out and working with local police and such doesn't actually happen that often, but it happens in every episode of this show. Um, so on one hand, if you're aspiring to be um, a psychologist or um, uh, like a criminal behavior person, then that show is only a fraction of what you'll be doing every day, and not even every day. It'll be, very rarely, honestly. And it certainly doesn't depict the kind of education you have to go through. It doesn't depict um, how long it takes to climb the ladder of hierarchy, and what it takes to be a part of a unit like in Criminal Minds. Um, and so, yeah, very different depictions of work. So, moving on. Workplace alienation, types of alienation, and in my particular case, usually working retail. Um, so, the types of alienation are alienation from the product itself, from producing the product of any kind, and um, alienation from the self, yourself, and alienation from other workers. So, in the retail really captures this, I think, because it is not only a service industry, but it is precisely the kind of capitalistic environment that Karl Marx was talking about. Um, so, in retail, let's say, for example, when I worked in the mall, I worked at Ardene's and I worked at Bentley's, and I had a couple other jobs in between that only lasted a few months. Um, so you are told to sell something that you've had no part in. And not only have you had no part in, you are supposed to love this product so much that you would recommend it to your mother. Like, it's so they require an amount of emotional labor that is absolutely um disproportionate to what you're like, what is actually happening, because all you're doing is selling something that, again, you have had no part in. So, for example, like Bentley's, it was just luggage, luggage and purses and wallets, um, things that contained other things. And a lot of the time, um, the products I was selling were significantly unaffordable for what they were paying me. And this is across um, the minimum wages that we've seen throughout the years. I think I started my first job at 10, I think, and it's 15 now, I think. So it's jumped quite a ways. And it's definitely alienation for sure, because you have very little attachment in anything that you do, you imagine. And a lot of the time, because these products are unaffordable, you have zero personal experience. And yet, almost every customer you talk to asks you to recommend something. How would you know? You've never used any of these products. You have no idea how they're made, other than what you might research on the internet, because your work or manager sure as hell isn't going to tell you, because they don't know either. Um, so again, not only are you selling something you have no connection to, but oftentimes, because of that environment, you often not liking this thing that you are trying to sell. Um, for example, um, I remember I worked at a very, and they thought they were high fashion, they weren't really. Um, and I did not like the style there at all. I thought it was very plain. Um, it was like H&M, but like zero patterns. Everything was plain. It was often this linen fabric, and it was scratchy, and it was overpriced. So in that kind of environment, you make up reasons. You try and glean what you can from the managers, and you just repeat and verbatim almost what they teach you on how to sell things. Like, you just have to pretend that you actually believe what they tell you, which more often than not isn't true. Um, and again, this is all tied into alienation from the self. And I think a great deal of that is dehumanization, essentially, because you may not be given a number essentially, but that is what's happening. You are but a cog in a greater machine. And if you do not do precisely as you are told, if you do not comply and reinforce the rules you are given, and if you do not act as they require you to, which is often in a very disingenuous and vapid behavior, um, because a lot of the time, again, because you have no connection with the product, you're supposed to act like you do. The more personal you make the story seem, the more likely you are to sell a product. And in fact, the more heartless you are, especially to your coworkers and to customers, and and if they have like a budget, or if they seem hesitant or something, the more heartless you are, the further you'll go. And I think a good example of this is the very end of the movie in Devil Wears Prada. Um, it is exactly that kind of sacrifice that service jobs and retail require of you. They require you to be a complete robot and, um, again, to reinforce rules that just often are impossible to actually follow. Um, and I think one of the really good examples of this is a budget. Rather, not a budget, it's a sales goal that a lot of retail places have, especially in the mall. They all have these enormous sales goals, and they're big numbers. They're numbers you wouldn't make in a year, and you're supposed to often make that in a day or a week, selling stuff. And you get like zero of that profit, right? And a lot of the time, this isn't commission. And if it is commission, then they reduce your hourly wage, which is horrible, which turns it into an even worse environment because not only are your other coworkers competitors at that point, but again, that kind of heartless behavior is very much wanted. They want you to be able to steal customers. They want you to just plow through and like just take. And it's, and again, these sales goals are impossible to reach. Very rarely does it happen, and because of that, it's another reason why. Um, and I feel like these sales goals are on purpose so that you have this impossible goal, and then the managers and the head office and all that, they can keep telling you this is how to be more efficient, this is how to be more efficient, because you're not reaching this impossible goal we set you, so you need to do better. You constantly need to do better in an impossible situation because they won't give you more, quote, tips. They won't give you anything to go on. It's absolutely all up to you to reach this impossible goal. And it turns into a very stressful work environment for sure. To those of us that do not like capitalism all that much, then it becomes very difficult to justify being there in the first place, even with the money. Anyway, I'm rambling on for too long. So, future career. All right, so I would like to get into social work. Let's start with education. So, in order to get into social work, you have to already have a degree or some kind of equivalent before you get into the social work program. And at that point, it's you start with the bachelor's degree in social work. Um, and then from there, it depends what you want to do. Um, I personally want to be a counselor or therapist of some kind. So that will likely require a master's or a PhD, depending on what kind of therapist or counselor I want to be. I haven't quite decided yet. Um, well, it's not so much I haven't decided yet, it's more that I would like more work experience before I cement that decision. Um, and as to the rest here, demographics, the source that I pulled this information from the US. I couldn't find anything for Canada. I just found a great deal of ads and, please come be a social worker. Here's good reasons why. Um, and the kind of demographics that social workers work with. So that was unhelpful too. So, what this particular source showed me was that the majority of people working in social work were generally female presenting, and they were between the ages of 25 and 34. Um, the age bracket after 34 was still quite significant. I think it was 70,000 or something like that. And um, then after you hit, I would say your mid 40s, the numbers drop really fast. So I think that might be related to the stress of the work and that sort of thing. That made sense to me, even though I am currently um, 31, but whatever. I guess still got a few years to go. Um, and the majority of social workers work in child care, in family services, and child protective services, and the related fields there. The other fields that this source listed was like addiction and um, one other thing I can't remember. But so a lot of it was focused on youth for sure, um, which is certainly interesting. um, and speaks to the cultural value. So I you could say that maybe because so many social workers are female presenting, that maybe they're just being motherly or something like that. Um, so the urge to protect our youth is certainly there. Um, However, in this current political climate, I won't say that social work is particularly valued, um, because uh, certain political affiliations seem to look down on services like the CPS and um, anything that is towards the greater good, essentially, so socialism and the like. They seem very against that. So I'm not sure I could say that social work as a career has a big cultural value. Um, Remuneration. So it's usually so that the average that I found was $42.52 per hour. Um, I will be happy with like just half of that, honestly. Um, so I don't have big expectations, and I find that this particular website is often um, significantly higher than reality. But their statistics and everything, their science behind this number is sound and everything, but um, I think that it's difficult to take into account um, your age group and the current economy and um, depending on like what your education is. Um, like, for example, my first degree was in English, so um, not a, it might be, I don't know, more of a requirement that maybe my first degree is in psychology or something like that in a more related field. I doubt that will be the case because you basically take another degree in social work, but who knows? I haven't been immersed in the workforce yet in social work field. Um, and the benefits of being a social worker, um, like in insurance and health benefits and the like, they definitely vary between employer. seems that because social workers have a tendency to advocate for um, like mental health and that sort of thing, that they have a more, I don't know to say, robust benefit. But again, that's difficult to say because it really, really depends on the employer. It depends what kind of work you're doing, like, and it depends on the company you're working for because especially if you're working for a startup company, your benefits might be a lot less. So it doesn't really matter, like, what you're doing for them might be, really important, but they just might not have the funds to get you those benefits that they might wish that they could. Um, or that's just not the company's motivation. And social work is just something that they had to do for some reason. Um, So again, there's a huge variety, so I'm not going to say one way or the other. Um, as for my motivation to become a social worker, honestly, it came a few years after I started RDQCA, the Red Deer Queer Community Association. Um, I co-founded it with my partner, and we started it because we didn't see really like an actual place or a queer community of any kind in Red Deer. It seemed like there was the olive. So, and that was essentially a bar, and it's just turning into a restaurant now, I think. So we really wanted to have that kind of space for queer people and allies and anyone that needed it. And a few years into working and getting to know the community and the industry of nonprofits itself, and just working through with everyone, it seemed like the natural conclusion was for at least one of us to get experience in social work. Um, and simply because of Red Deer's lack, I would say, of community, or like a proper place of gathering, of becoming a community, because again, there's not really a place. And now with COVID, that's even harder. So, and honestly, because of the plague, it's been easier for me to go to school and run RDQCA at the same time because my partner is able to take on more, because there isn't a whole lot going on in person. So again, that is both difficult for the community, but also a little bit easier for us. Um, but yeah, for personal reasons, I would say that while I was arranging events for LGBT youth and working with them, it really made me want to have something that I could give back to them. Um, I want to be able to give youth what I didn't have when I was in high school and in junior high, because during those days there was no such thing as a GSA. There was no such thing as having a queer space at all in a public school. That was absolutely beyond. Especially in my high school, I was in a small town. So, and that is also a part of my motivation, is to go around to more rural schools and um, as a kind of make a program so that we can, teach teachers and students about the queer community and how to make your own GSA and stuff like that. Anyway, I feel like I've been going on for a while. um, I believe that's everything. Here are my citations. Of course, I'll be sending this in a file to you as well. And I hope that was everything you were looking for. Have a good day, and I'll see you next time, I guess.